a form of rebellion is like enjoying sex and yeah.
Okay, how does the narrative invoke logos and pathos to move the story forward?
I feel like we touched on this a lot because like it obviously plays a lot on the pathos, and obviously so you see the logicalness of like Winston's thinking and then just the ethos of like Winston's position and the job and like where he stands, and just you see it as you move through the novel.
Yeah, like they're not really like trying to project pathos onto us, but we feel it anyway just because of what's happening. Like, yeah. Next part is point of view. Is the novel first person, third person limited, or omniscient? So I guess I would say third person limited because it's pretty much just focusing on Winston, but it's not in first person.
Yeah, you just hear like his
what he
thoughts
knows.
and like when he's thinking.
So is the narrator reliable or unreliable?
I don't think entirely, just because while he knows that the party is changing history, he can't go back and prove the specifics of it. He just knows that what he's changed, but that doesn't mean that he can't go back and fact check. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so like his memory might be a little faulty.
Yes.
Because everything, he has to burn everything after he reads it. And
I mean, just think of like how many books like you read in your life, and like if you ever get like one book messed up with another one, but this is like actual real life events. It's like there's a lot of probability that like he knows generally what happened, but he doesn't know the full spectrum, or like, and he only knows the small pieces that he's given. And if you notice the ones that are like small paragraphs, and they're probably, like we said before, they have a lot of people working on this, so like there's probably like a full like essay about this, but each of them only get the small paragraphs, and then each small paragraph is probably made to be an entire thing. So
I think he's probably like the most reliable out of all the characters that we met so far, though, just because like if we had gotten like Mrs. Parsons, she's like entirely brainwashed and she's like afraid of her children, so I think she would have been like much more gung-ho about the party.
you can see like his inner turmoil towards it.
But I also feel like nobody's entirely reliable as a narrator in this context, just because history and like what actually happened is very different.
Okay, so now we're going to move towards the rhetorical analysis of it, and we're going to start rhetorically analyzing the setting. So basically the setting is you're in a oppressive government society where Big Brother is completely watching over you. You can see in different sections of the book where they talk about how there are posters everywhere, you're constantly being listened to, you have basically there's cameras, there's basically anything you can think of for them to keep watch over you, there's spies, there's anything that the government can do basically to stop thought crimes from happening is happening.
Like for instance, the telescreens, and they're like you can't turn it completely off. It's always on at a low volume at the very minimum, and they watch you from that. So that's fine.
Like they even have their children spy on their parents. It goes to that extent.
Okay, so the three appeals are ethos, logos, and pathos, and you can kind of see the ethos of the setting by you constantly see the setting throughout Winston's eyes, and you see how he's walking through, you can see all these things that are happening, you can see the cameras, you can see the posters, you can see the setting that's constantly oppressive. It's obviously illogical because Winston wouldn't lie in his own narrative. He's what he's seeing is what he's seeing. He's not doing any types of things that would skew his vision or something like that. There's not really anything that would cause him to not be actually seeing what he's actually seeing. And there's obviously the pathos in it because you can see how Winston's reacting to this and how other characters are reacting to this. Like some of the kids, like the parents are scared of their own children, and you can just see how all these characters are reacting to this environment. And I don't think really any of them, very few people, I think deep down truly like this environment, and it really makes you have a pathos towards them.
So the invention is finding the available means for persuasion. I guess 1984 is trying to persuade us that a totalitarian government isn't as good as what it would seem. Total control should mean that no one is rebelling, and they're not rebelling, but they're also in a state where even if they have their own thoughts, they get killed. So George Orwell is trying to persuade us that that's not the best way to go. So arrangement is selection and assembly of argument for rhetorical effect. So, I mean, it's arranged basically through Winston's eyes and his memories and his experiences, and through him we know that the world they live in wasn't always like that, and that it could be worse. It could have been worse before they had that government, but that's not proven because that's what the party and Big Brother tells them. It's not necessarily what actually happened. So we learn everything through Winston, who learns everything through his job.
Here, the style is obviously like George Orwell writes in a kind of very plain, like organized, like language, and you can understand what's going on. And especially in the time when it was written, they tended to use very like flowery and like descriptive language. He's kind of very plain and just gets to the point very quickly.
So memory. Well, the reader goes back in their memory when they think about totalitarian governments, when they think about their history classes and like what they've learned, and they know that it's not good. And then Winston himself goes back into his memory when he thinks about like his family disappearing and how the government used to be. And yeah.
Delivery. Well, George Orwell wrote a novel just to basically tell us all that totalitarian governments are terrible and that they should not happen.
So the speaker of this book mainly is Winston, and I guess he is speaking from a standpoint of having experienced this, but also having vague memories of what it was like before then.
There's also like the context of like the situation and where he's like constantly being like overwatched by Big Brother, and like just like the entire setting is just basically awful. And the subject is obviously still like this oppressive government and what it's doing to its people, and obviously we're going to continue reading, and there's obviously going to be the subject of what's going to happen next, and there's probably either going to be a lot of sadness or probably some type of rebellion. So
Okay, so the audience. So George Orwell, he kind of wrote this novel in response to like Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin, who had totalitarian and political like authority. So he didn't like their governments, and he kind of wanted to like write this in response to that. So he wrote about how awful they were. And then audience back then, and then like still today, they know like they still like learn about Hitler and Stalin, and they like recognize that totalitarian governments aren't good, so they have that background information about it, and people like believe that totalitarian governments aren't good, and this book just reinforces that.
Alright, for the tone. The tone it's very matter of fact. There's not much pathos involved in it. It's just, he gets mad, he gets angry, but we don't really see much of that besides when he's writing in his journal. But there is this underlying feeling of suspense, because we do know at any point in time he could be caught and he could be killed.
Alright, thank you for listening to the first section of our discussion of George Orwell's 1984. Thanks for listening.